Go.
All right. Good day again. St. Louis, third day in a row. Economic impacts of the Civil War. Oh wow, all came up once. Okay. The South uses increased use of sharecropping and tenant farming. I know you've learned about sharecropping, but a quick review. Sharecropping, I mean, once the slaves are freed, it's like, great, they're free, but now what do they do? It's going to be hard to get jobs. People aren't going to hire them. And what these southern plantation owners do, say, okay, well, you can farm my land, have a place to stay, but you'll have to pay for it with a percentage of your crops. And they basically charge them such a large percentage that the former slaves were never going to get out from under. I mean, this really kept them almost close to slavery, kept them dependent on the white landowners. The North, great period of production. It's a boom period. They do well, they thrive. Trade with Europe and Asia greatly increases, and now there's an ever increasing number of women, children, and immigrants filling these positions, which aren't nice. Okay, now, question for John Leonard, if you're watching, if you were here, I'd be asking this. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Well, obviously, Grant. But that's a question I've asked before, and people say, oh, how should I know? It's an old joke and probably a stupid one, but we're going to talk a little bit about President Grant, who served during the period of Reconstruction. Remember, I told you he was a great general. Not so great as a president. Not a good political leader. Grant liked to drink a little too much, or I should say a lot too much. He drank a ton. He also smoked like 14 cigars a day, and that's what got him in the end, throat cancer. But some of the stuff about his presidency, it's marked by scandal. What his presidency is most noted for is some kind of not so honest things that happen. Not always because of him, but happened under him. Things like what's called the Credit Mobilier scandal involved railroad companies were becoming very powerful at the time. Railroad companies bribing congressmen to use certain government-controlled areas or areas that were privately owned, but a lot of things like that. Salary grabs where Congress voted to increase their pay right in the middle of their term. People like Boss Tweed in New York City, very corrupt political leader there. That happens during this time. Ran a place called Tammany Hall. They rigged elections and paid people off. So, a lot of bad stuff was happening. The end of Reconstruction. So Grant was a Republican, but all his corruption really weakened the party. So in the election of 1876, potentially a change will happen. Public opinion began changing. Northerners, as we go through the 1870s, are less concerned with protecting black rights. If I say they stop paying attention, they're more concerned with private pursuits. They want to leave the Civil War behind them. And groups like the KKK really became prevalent in the South. In the election of 1876, Republican Rutherford Hayes, the Republicans did win again. He beat Democratic Samuel Tilden, but it was very controversial. Tilden actually won the popular vote, and Tilden really probably should have been president, but it was given to Hayes. And there was another compromise made, compromise of 1876. They said, okay, your man, Hayes, the Republican, can be president, but you need to remove your troops from the South. The federal troops need to be removed from the South, and that's the agreement, and it ends Reconstruction. Hayes would be president, all federal troops would leave the South. So the Republican Party basically now disappears in the South. The Democrats are dominant. They become known as the Solid South, solidly Democrat. Opposite of today. Now the Republicans are dominant in the South. So that's what I just said. Black citizens were disenfranchised, or their vote was taken away to make sure Democrats had control. They couldn't on paper, but they did using methods that we already talked about, literacy tests, etc. Segregation comes about, which is separation of people by race. This is when you see separate black facilities and white facilities. Jim Crow laws come about, which segregated the public facilities, white-only restaurants. And the Supreme Court said these were okay. Property owner can run his business as he sees fit. And the Supreme Court case is going to come about, which reinforces this. Plessy versus Ferguson. Homer Plessy was a black man, and he wanted to ride in an all-white rail car, the railroad. And he entered that car, and he was not allowed to stay there. And he was moved. He said, you know, his due process had been violated. Went to court, went to the Supreme Court, and the court said, nope, the owners can run it as they see fit. You can be separated as long as your facilities are equal. Separate but equal. So it's okay to separate the races as long as they have equal facilities. So, and this is going to exist through 1954, Robert's Board of Education. So blacks are separated in many places, but was it really equal? No. Separate was not equal at all. But the court said this could be done. Black responses to segregation. These two names that are going to come up are important. They're ones that I've seen on a lot of regents. Booker T. Washington said, well, accept segregation, stay separated, but prove yourselves. Prove you're worthy, prove you're just as qualified as whites. Get an education. And places like Tuskegee Institute. And that's how he said they would eventually improve themselves. So he said, accept it, don't fight it. Whereas the opposite point of view, W.E.B. Du Bois said, blacks should insist on their rights, oppose Jim Crow laws, fight for their rights, not physically, but speak out and demand they be treated